Lisa Harrison was a woman who seemed to have it all. At 32, she was the epitome of beauty and grace. Born and raised in a small, picturesque town in Oregon, she had always been the girl everyone admired. With her golden blonde hair that framed her delicate face, piercing blue eyes that could light up a room, and a figure that turned heads wherever she went, Lisa had never lacked attention. But it wasn't just her looks that made her special. She was smart, charismatic, and had an uncanny ability to make people feel at ease. Lisa met Mark Harrison during her college years at the University of Oregon, where she studied business administration. Mark, 2 years her senior, was pursuing a degree in engineering. He was the kind of man who, at first glance, seemed unremarkable: average height, a slender build, with brown hair and kind hazel eyes hidden behind a pair of glasses. But what Mark lacked in striking physical features, he made up for with his intelligence and a heart of gold. He was steady, reliable, and deeply in love with Lisa from the moment he saw her. They married soon after college, settling down in a suburban neighborhood in Portland, Oregon. Mark's career as a civil engineer flourished, allowing Lisa to focus on her passion, interior design. She quickly made a name for herself, becoming one of the most sought-after designers in the area. Their life seemed perfect: a beautiful home, successful careers, and a love that their friends often envied. Yet beneath the surface, cracks had begun to form in their seemingly flawless marriage. Lisa, always hungry for excitement, began to feel trapped in the monotony of suburban life. Mark, dedicated to his work, had become increasingly distant, often lost in his projects, leaving Lisa feeling neglected and alone. Lisa's dissatisfaction with her marriage grew slowly, like a shadow creeping over her once happy life. She found herself yearning for the thrill she used to feel in her younger years, a spark that had long since dimmed in her relationship with Mark. As much as she tried to ignore it, the feeling gnawed at her, growing stronger with each passing day. It was during one of her many design projects that Lisa met David Moore. David was everything Mark was not: charismatic, wealthy, and dangerously exciting. At 38, he was a self-made entrepreneur, the owner of a chain of luxury hotels that spanned across the country. David was tall, with dark hair that he kept perfectly styled, sharp features, and a smile that could charm anyone. His presence was magnetic, and from the moment they met, Lisa was drawn to him like a moth to a flame. Their first encounter was purely professional. David had hired Lisa to redesign the interior of one of his hotels in downtown Portland. From the start, there was an undeniable chemistry between them. David was impressed by Lisa's talent and vision, and she was captivated by his confidence and the way he made her feel alive again. Their conversations flowed effortlessly, filled with laughter and flirtation that soon crossed the boundaries of a professional relationship. It wasn't long before their meetings became more frequent, and the nature of their interactions took a turn toward the personal. They began having lunch together after their work meetings, which quickly evolved into dinners at exclusive restaurants, where they shared intimate conversations and lingering glances. Lisa tried to resist at first, telling herself that it was just harmless fun, that she was only enjoying the attention. But deep down, she knew she was playing with fire. The moment their affair began was almost inevitable. After a particularly successful project completion, David invited Lisa to celebrate with him over a glass of champagne at his penthouse. The view of the city lights from his balcony was breathtaking, and the atmosphere was charged with tension. As they stood there, side by side, David gently touched her hand, sending shivers down her spine. She turned to look at him, and before she knew it, they were kissing, passionately, urgently, as if they had been waiting for this moment all their lives. Lisa's affair with David became the secret that she both cherished and feared. It was intoxicating, the excitement of sneaking around, the thrill of being desired by such a powerful man. But with every lie she told Mark, with every excuse she made to cover her tracks, a part of her felt a growing sense of dread. She knew that what she was doing was wrong, that she was betraying the man who had given her everything. Yet she couldn't stop. The more she tried to pull away from David, the more she found herself drawn to him. Mark Harrison was a man of routine. He woke up at the same time every morning, made himself a cup of coffee, and headed to work with a sense of purpose. He had always been dependable, the kind of husband who took pride in providing for his family and making sure that everything was in order. But over the past few months, he had noticed subtle changes in Lisa, changes that he couldn't quite put his finger on. At first, it was little things: Lisa coming home later than usual, her phone buzzing with messages she quickly dismissed, the distant look in her eyes when they were together. Mark tried to convince himself that he was imagining things, that the stress of work was making him paranoid, but as the weeks went by, the signs became harder to ignore. Lisa had become more secretive, often making excuses to leave the house or spending long hours on her phone. She seemed distracted, her mind elsewhere even when they were supposed to be spending time together. Mark's attempts to engage her in conversation were met with vague responses, and the intimacy they once shared had all but disappeared. One evening, as they sat together in their living room, Mark noticed Lisa texting someone with a smile on her face, a smile that he hadn't seen directed at him in a long time. When he asked who she was texting, Lisa brushed it off, saying it was just a friend from work, but the way she quickly put her phone down and changed the subject made Mark's stomach knot with unease. The turning point came when Mark accidentally overheard a conversation Lisa was having on the phone late one night. She thought he was asleep, but something had stirred him awake, and as he walked past the bedroom door, he heard her voice, soft, affectionate, and unmistakably intimate. She was talking to someone in a way she hadn't talked to him in months, maybe even years. Mark didn't confront Lisa right away. Instead, he lay awake that night, replaying the conversation in his mind, trying to make sense of it all. The possibility that Lisa was having an affair slowly took root in his mind, growing into a certainty that he could no longer ignore. The thought made his heart ache, but it also ignited a fire within him, a determination to uncover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. As the days passed, Mark began to observe Lisa more closely. He noticed how she would always take her phone with her, even to the bathroom, and how she would become visibly nervous whenever she received a message. There were times when she would leave the house without a clear explanation, claiming she had errands to run or that she was meeting a friend. But the more Mark pressed for details, the more evasive Lisa became. Mark's suspicions gnawed at him, making it difficult for him to focus on anything else. His work began to suffer, and his normally calm demeanor was replaced with a quiet, simmering anger. He felt betrayed, not just by Lisa's actions, but by the fact that she had kept it hidden from him for so long. The love they had shared, the life they had built together, now felt like a cruel joke. Determined to find out the truth, Mark started following Lisa. He began with small steps, checking her phone when she was in the shower, looking at her emails, trying to piece together any clues that would confirm his suspicions. But Lisa was careful, erasing messages and covering her tracks. Frustrated by his lack of progress, Mark realized that if he wanted answers, he would have to take more drastic measures. One Friday afternoon, when Lisa said she was going out to meet a friend, Mark decided to follow her. He left the house a few minutes after she did, keeping a safe distance as he trailed her car. His heart pounded in his chest as he drove, a mix of fear and anger swirling within him. Part of him hoped that he was wrong, that this was all a misunderstanding, but another part of him knew that the truth was far worse than he could imagine. Mark followed Lisa to a downtown restaurant, one of the upscale places they used to frequent together. He parked his car a few blocks away and watched as Lisa entered the restaurant, her demeanor calm and confident. After a few minutes, Mark saw her meet a man at a table near the window, a man who was none other than David Moore. Seeing them together, laughing and talking as if they were the only two people in the world, made Mark's blood run cold. There was no mistaking the intimacy between them, the way Lisa looked at David, the way she touched his hand across the table. It was a look she hadn't given Mark in a long time, a look that confirmed everything he had feared. Mark sat in his car for what felt like hours, unable to tear his eyes away from the scene unfolding before him. His mind raced with thoughts of betrayal, anger, and sadness. He felt a deep, itching pain in his chest, a pain that only intensified as he realized what this meant for his marriage, for his life. But amidst the pain, a new emotion began to take hold: revenge. Mark knew he couldn't confront Lisa, not yet. He needed to be sure, to gather more evidence, to make her face the consequences of her actions in the most devastating way possible. He needed to plan to make her pay for the hurt she had caused him. And so, with a heavy heart and a mind filled with dark thoughts, Mark drove home, his mind already working on how he would destroy the life Lisa had built with David. Over the next few days, Mark's demeanor changed. He was no longer the loving, attentive husband Lisa had known. He became distant, his conversations with her reduced to monosyllabic responses, his eyes cold and unfeeling. Lisa noticed the change, but she attributed it to the stress of his work. She had no idea that Mark knew the truth, that he was silently plotting her downfall. Mark continued to gather evidence, but this time with a quiet resolve. He took photos of Lisa and David together, recorded their conversations when he could, and collected every piece of information that would paint a clear picture of her betrayal. He knew that when the time came, he would expose Lisa in a way that would leave no room for denial, no escape from the consequences of her actions. But Mark's plans weren't just about exposing the affair. He wanted to make Lisa suffer, to take away everything she held dear, just as she had done to him. He began to think of ways to hurt her, to destroy not only her relationship with David but also her reputation, her career, and her social standing. Mark's love for Lisa had turned into something dark, something twisted, and he knew that he would stop at nothing to make her pay. As Mark quietly prepared for the day of reckoning, Lisa continued her affair with David, blissfully unaware of the storm that was brewing. She still loved Mark in her own way, but the excitement and passion she felt with David were too intoxicating to give up. She believed she could keep both lives separate, that she could have it all without anyone getting hurt. But Lisa was wrong. Mark was no longer the man she thought he was. He had changed and transformed by the betrayal he had uncovered, and he was now a man on a mission to expose Lisa for what she truly was and to make her regret the day she ever thought she could deceive him. And so the stage was set. The players were in place, and the first act of this tragic tale was about to come to an end. Mark's revenge was coming, and it would be swift, brutal, and unforgettable. Mark Harrison had always been a man of quiet determination, and this trait served him well as he meticulously planned his next steps. He had gathered all the evidence he needed: photographs, text messages, and recorded conversations, all meticulously documented and stored in a file that he kept hidden in a place Lisa would never think to look. Every detail was accounted for, nothing was left to chance. Despite the storm raging inside him, Mark maintained a calm exterior. He went about his daily routine as if nothing was wrong, pretending to be the same steady, dependable husband Lisa had always known. He kissed her goodbye each morning as she left for work, cooked dinner for them in the evenings, and even made small talk about their day. But behind his calm demeanor, Mark's mind was consumed with thoughts of revenge. He knew that the confrontation had to be public. It wasn't enough to simply tell Lisa that he knew about the affair. He needed her to feel the full weight of her betrayal, to experience the shame and humiliation she had so casually brought upon their marriage. He wanted her to see the disappointment and judgment in the eyes of those she loved, to watch as her perfect life crumbled before her eyes. And so Mark began to make plans for a family meeting, a gathering of both his and Lisa's families, as well as a few close friends. He told Lisa that he wanted to have everyone over for dinner, to celebrate the success of a recent project he had completed at work. Lisa was surprised by the sudden desire to host a dinner, but she didn't question it. If anything, she was relieved to see Mark in good spirits again, seemingly back to his old self. As the day of the dinner approached, Mark felt a strange sense of calm. He had done everything he needed to do, and now it was just a matter of time. He rehearsed the confrontation in his mind, imagining how Lisa would react when he revealed the truth. He pictured the shock, the denial, and then the realization as she saw the evidence he had gathered. The thought of it filled him with a dark satisfaction. The day of the dinner arrived, and Mark could feel the tension in the air. He had invited both his and Lisa's parents, her younger sister Emily, and a few of their closest friends. He had even extended an invitation to David Moore, though he had done so under the guise of wanting to discuss a potential business venture. David, always eager to expand his network, had readily agreed to come. Lisa was busy in the kitchen preparing a feast for their guests. She had always enjoyed hosting, and tonight was no exception. She moved around the kitchen with practiced ease, unaware of the impending disaster that was about to unfold. Mark watched her from the doorway, his expression unreadable. She looked so happy, so content, and for a moment, a pang of guilt tugged at his heart, but it was quickly replaced by the memory of her betrayal, and his resolve hardened once more. As the guests began to arrive, the house filled with the sound of laughter and conversation. Lisa greeted everyone with her usual warmth, playing the role of the perfect hostess. Mark mingled with the guests, engaging in small talk, but his mind was elsewhere. He kept glancing at his watch, counting down the minutes until it was time to set his plan into motion. David arrived last, fashionably late as always. He greeted Lisa with a kiss on the cheek, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by Mark. Lisa blushed slightly but quickly moved to introduce David to the rest of the guests. Mark watched the interaction with a sense of detachment, knowing that soon, everything would change. Once everyone was seated around the dining table, Mark raised his glass for a toast. He spoke briefly about how grateful he was to have everyone there, how much he appreciated their support, and how lucky he felt to have such a wonderful family. Lisa beamed at him, touched by his words, completely unaware of what was coming next. Then, with a slight smile, Mark announced that he had something important to share. He stood up from his seat and walked over to a small side table where he had placed the file containing all the evidence of Lisa's affair. He picked it up, feeling the weight of it in his hands, and then turned to face the room. The atmosphere in the room shifted as Mark began to speak. His voice was calm and measured, but there was an underlying tension that made everyone sit up and take notice. He started by talking about trust, about the vows he and Lisa had made to each other when they got married. He spoke about the importance of honesty, of being faithful, and how those were the foundations of any successful relationship. As he spoke, Lisa's smile began to fade. She could sense that something was wrong, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. She glanced at Mark, trying to read his expression, but he was focused on his speech. The other guests exchanged confused glances, unsure of where this was going. Then, without warning, Mark opened the file and began laying out the evidence. He started with the text messages, printed screenshots of conversations between Lisa and David, filled with flirtation and intimate exchanges. As he read them aloud, the room fell into a stunned silence. Lisa's face turned pale, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. She looked around the room, seeing the looks of horror and disappointment on the faces of her family and friends. Next came the photos, pictures of Lisa and David together, holding hands, kissing, even entering a hotel room together. Mark held them up for everyone to see, each image driving the knife deeper into Lisa's heart. She wanted to scream, to deny everything, but the evidence was undeniable. Tears welled up in her eyes as she realized that her life was unraveling before her very eyes. Finally, Mark turned to David. "And you," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You came into my home, pretended to be my friend, while all the while you were sleeping with my wife. How does it feel to know that you've destroyed not just one, but two families?" David tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. He looked at Lisa, his eyes filled with guilt and fear, but there was nothing he could say to make this right. The room was deathly silent, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall. Lisa's mother began to cry, her sobs breaking the heavy silence. Lisa's father looked at her with a mixture of anger and disappointment, while Mark's parents sat in stunned disbelief. No one knew what to say, no one knew how to react. Lisa, overwhelmed by the weight of her actions, collapsed into her chair, burying her face in her hands. She could feel the judgmental eyes of everyone in the room on her, could hear the whispers of shock and disgust. Her perfect life was over, destroyed in a matter of minutes by the man she had betrayed. Mark stood there, looking down at Lisa, feeling a mix of emotions. There was a part of him that felt satisfaction, knowing that he had exposed her for the liar and cheat that she was. But there was also a part of him that felt an overwhelming sadness, a sadness for the love they had once shared, for the life they had built together, now in ruins. "Lisa," Mark said quietly, "I loved you, I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me. With lies and betrayal." His voice cracked slightly, betraying the pain he was feeling inside. "I hope it was worth it, because you've lost everything now. You've lost me, you've lost your family, and you've lost the respect of everyone in this room." He turned to the rest of the guests, his expression hardening once more. "I want everyone to know that this marriage is over. Lisa and I will be filing for divorce immediately, and I will be seeking full custody of our son. I cannot, in good conscience, allow my child to be raised by a woman who is so morally bankrupt." With those final words, Mark left the room, leaving Lisa to face the consequences of her actions. He walked out of the house, feeling a strange sense of relief. It was over. The lies, the deceit, the betrayal. It was all over, and now he could finally begin to heal. The aftermath of the confrontation was devastating. Lisa's world had collapsed in an instant. The man she had thought she could outsmart had orchestrated her downfall with a level of precision she hadn't believed him capable of. The shame and guilt were unbearable. Her parents couldn't look her in the eye, her friends were silent, and even her younger sister Emily, who had always idolized her, was avoiding her gaze. The silence that filled the house after Mark's departure was oppressive. Lisa remained seated, her mind numb, unable to fully process what had just happened. She knew her life would never be the same. Mark's words kept replaying in her mind. "You've lost everything now." And she knew he was right. Everything she had worked for, everything she had taken for granted, was gone. Just as she was beginning to come to terms with the gravity of the situation, Lisa's phone rang, cutting through the thick silence. She picked it up, her hands trembling, and saw that it was the police. Confused and terrified, she answered, her voice barely a whisper. "Mrs. Harrison," the officer on the other end asked, "we need you to come to the hospital immediately. There's been an incident involving your husband." Lisa's heart stopped. The officer's tone was grave, and a cold fear gripped her. Is he okay?" she stammered, her mind racing with the possibilities. "Ma'am, I think it's best if you come to the hospital," the officer replied, his voice devoid of emotion. "We'll explain everything when you get here." The call ended, leaving Lisa in a state of shock. She turned to her parents, who had been watching her with concerned expressions, and told them what the officer had said. Her father, seeing the fear in her eyes, immediately offered to drive her to the hospital. The drive was a blur. Lisa's mind was consumed with worry and dread. What had happened to Mark? Was he hurt? Had he been in an accident? She couldn't bear the thought of something terrible happening to him, not after everything that had just transpired. When they arrived at the hospital, Lisa rushed to the front desk, demanding to know where her husband was. The nurse looked up his name and directed them to a private room at the end of the hallway. Lisa's heart pounded in her chest as she made her way down the corridor, her parents close behind her. As they approached the room, they were met by a doctor who looked at Lisa with a grim expression. "Mrs. Harrison," he said, "I need to prepare you. What you're about to see, it's not easy to process." Lisa's fear deepened, and she gripped her mother's hand for support. "What happened to him? Is he okay?" The doctor hesitated before answering. "Your husband is alive, but he's been severely injured. There was an altercation and, well, it's best if you see for yourself." With that, the doctor pushed open the door, revealing a scene that would haunt Lisa for the rest of her life. Mark lay on the hospital bed, his face pale and contorted in pain. His body was wrapped in bandages, and several tubes were connected to various machines that monitored his vital signs. But it wasn't the sight of Mark in a hospital bed that shocked Lisa to her core. It was the presence of David, lying in the bed next to him, barely recognizable due to the extent of his injuries. David's body was a mess of bruises and cuts, his face swollen and disfigured. He was unconscious, hooked up to a ventilator, with no sign of waking up anytime soon. The sight of him made Lisa's stomach turn, and she felt a wave of nausea wash over her. What happened?" Lisa asked, her voice trembling. The doctor sighed and motioned for them to sit down. "We don't know all the details yet, but it appears that your husband confronted Mr. Moore at his home after leaving the family dinner. There was a physical altercation, and during the fight, Mr. Harrison, well, he used a weapon." Lisa's eyes widened in horror. "A weapon? What kind of weapon?" The doctor looked uncomfortable as he answered, "It was a knife, Mrs. Harrison. Your husband stabbed Mr. Moore multiple times, and the wounds were severe. We were able to stabilize him, but the damage is extensive. He's currently in a coma, and it's unclear if he'll recover." Lisa felt like the room was spinning. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Mark had done this. The man she had married, the man who had always been so calm and composed, had attacked David in a fit of rage. It didn't seem possible, but the evidence was right in front of her. As if sensing her disbelief, the doctor continued, "Mr. Harrison was also injured in the fight, though his injuries are less severe. He's conscious but in a lot of pain. The police have already spoken to him, and I'm afraid he'll be facing serious charges once he's discharged." Lisa's world crumbled even further. Not only had she destroyed her marriage and her family, but now Mark was facing the possibility of prison. The thought of their son growing up without his father was too much to bear, and she broke down in tears, her sobs echoing through the sterile hospital room. Once Lisa had composed herself, she asked to see Mark. The doctor led her to his bedside, where he lay with his eyes closed, his face etched with pain. As she approached, He slowly opened his eyes and looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Mark," Lisa whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Why? Why did you do this?" Mark didn't respond at first. He simply stared at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and anger. Finally he spoke, his voice barely audible. "I couldn't let him get away with it, Lisa. He took everything from me, my marriage, my family, my dignity. I wanted him to suffer, to feel the pain he caused me." Lisa shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "But this? You destroyed everything, Mark. Our son, what's going to happen to him now?" Mark closed his eyes, unable to look at her. "I know I've made things worse. I know I've ruined everything. But at the time, all I could think about was making him pay. I lost control, Lisa. I let my anger consume me, and now it's too late." Lisa wanted to scream, to shake him, to make him understand the magnitude of what he had done, but she knew it wouldn't change anything. The damage was already done, and there was no going back. As they sat there in silence, the weight of their actions pressing down on them, Lisa realized that they were both to blame. She had betrayed Mark, and in his pain and anger he had done something unforgivable. Their marriage, their family, their entire lives had been shattered, and there was no way to put the pieces back together. In the days that followed, Mark was arrested and charged with attempted murder. The media caught wind of the story, and soon their names were splashed across every headline. The details of their private lives laid bare for the world to see. Lisa was vilified in the press, labeled as a cheating wife who had driven her husband to violence. Mark was portrayed as a man pushed to the brink, his actions both condemned and sympathized with in equal measure. David remained in a coma, his condition critical. His family, devastated by the attack, vowed to pursue the harshest punishment for Mark. The prospect of a long, drawn-out legal battle loomed over them, with the outcome uncertain. Lisa tried to keep her life together for the sake of their son, but it was a losing battle. Everywhere she went, she was met with judgmental stares and whispered conversations. Her reputation was ruined, her career in jeopardy, and her social circle had all but vanished. The life she had once known was gone, replaced by a never-ending nightmare. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, Lisa found herself reflecting on the choices that had led to this moment. She had been selfish, thinking she could have it all without consequences. But in the end, her actions had destroyed not only her own life, but the lives of those she cared about. Mark was sentenced to prison, his once promising career and future now in ruins. Their son was left to grow up in the shadow of his parents' mistakes, a victim of circumstances beyond his control. Lisa was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered life, knowing that she would never fully escape the consequences of her actions. The guilt and shame would follow her for the rest of her days, a constant reminder of the life she had lost. And as she sat alone in the quiet of their empty house, she realized that there were no winners in this story, only broken lives and broken hearts, the result of choices that could never be undone.